was like, I thought you were hiding in the restroom.
I was talking to a client, sorry.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. We're going to call our meeting back to order. We were in recess for a few minutes. First of all, I just want to thank Sherry and Jim very, very much for hosting a little reception for the town employees. That was really, really nice, and surprised me with the cake, which was delicious. So thank you very much. But now we have our business to do. So we're reconvening the meeting. This is our regular meeting of April 20th, the Board of Selectmen meeting. And actually, just one note, we don't need a private executive session. The town attorney told me there is no litigation in the personnel item we covered last time. So there's no private executive session at the end of the meeting. The first item is approval of the minutes of our regular meeting of April 6th, which are in our packet. So I'm happy to make a motion to approve the minutes from our April 6th meeting.
Second.
Seconded by Sherry. Any corrections or discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That carries unanimously. And the other pro forma item is the miscellaneous tax collector refunds from the tax office in this envelope, which has been recommended by the tax collector. Happy to make a motion to approve those.
Second.
And seconded by Sherry as well. And all in favor on that item?
Aye.
Aye, that carries unanimously. We did have a few notifications of resignations. Miriam Frank, who's been a member of our Special Projects Standing Building Committee, has to resign for personal reasons, but she said she could stick it out till the end of May. And so her resignation will take effect on May 31st for information. And Linda Bluestein, who has been a long-serving member on a lot of town boards, but recently on the Board of Health. Her family is moving nearby, but is moving from where they are, and so she's stepping down. And I just want to thank them both. In particular, well, I'll let Sherry say a few words, but they've both done great service for the town, and really, really appreciate their efforts for the town. And just on that, it's informational, but I know you know Linda well, if you want to offer any words of...
Well, I want to thank both Miriam Frank and Linda Bluestein for their service. And yes, I've known Linda for a long time, and I'm glad that she's going to still be in the area, but I'm unhappy that she's not able to continue on the Board of Health, because I know she was a big contributor to their board.
And those are non-voting items, that's just informational. I also just want to let the selectmen know that I forwarded to the RTM a nomination and a recommendation for the Employee Retirement Board, Jeff Mullen. I don't know if either of you know Jeff. If you know Jeff.
I don't.
But Jeff actually was a member for a couple of years, 3 or 4 years ago. Jeff's been an investment manager for 25 years, and he actually was a great part of the board. He stepped down at the time because of some of the business conflicts, because of the situation that was happening in relation to our consulting firm, but because some of that is now behind us, those conflicts are no longer. We have a new consultant, so he felt that if we were interested, he could rejoin, and I had the resignation a few months ago of Ms. Nordine Farlikas, so I forwarded that nomination, and he did go to the committee meetings last week, so I just wanted to let the board know about that. Okay. And the next first item of regular business for the full board is item number 6, which is to here consider and approve a memorandum of understanding between the town of Fairfield and the State of Connecticut Department of Public Works regarding a proposal for the state to rebuild the Fairfield Regional Fire Training Center and to approve the attached, I guess I should just reword this to say, and to approve the attached agreement. The agreement is entitled Agreement Concerning Fairfield Regional Fire Training Academy. So it's actually Academy as opposed to Center. I guess that's a technicality. And I just, for the record, our board did hear a fair amount about this item about 7-8 months ago. If you remember, we approved some seed money for the cleanup of some remediation at the site that the RTM and the Board of Finance later approved I guess it was last summer. But this is actually the big final agreement to then allow the state to hopefully secure the final funding for this. So if I could maybe ask Assistant Chief Tracy and Assistant Attorney, Town Attorney Kennelly, so just give us a few minutes of summary about this item. Welcome, folks, and welcome to our Fire Chief and Public Works Director.
Say thank you to Chris. Chris really put a lot of time into it and worked hard on it, and he was determined to do it. And I'd just like to just go on record and say, job well done.
Thank you.
We couldn't do it
Thank
if
you.
we didn't have him.
That's very nice to hear. Thank you, Dick. So the floor is all yours.
Well, I'll give as brief a summary as I can, given that I've got about 40 years of history that led us to this moment. And 4 years, literally since the first week that I came on as training director. The school, to thumbnail it, is on the site of the Nike radar tracking system. And the building that we're in is the original Nike building, which had was scheduled to have a 20-year lifespan. We're in the 60th something year. So the state recognized 10 years ago the need for all of the fire schools across the state to be upgraded. A study was done, bonding was authorized by the legislature, and it has been 10 years, well, 9 years until the first one was started, and that's in New Haven, and it's just about to open. In fact, our probationary firefighters who are up there in Hartford for rookie class will be doing their final burn there. The second school was just authorized by the first act of the new governor in his bonding commission, and so Hartford is going in, which puts us up. And for that time, from '07 until now, it has been largely a study of the site, which you know and have authorized those specific remediations that need done, and then a larger issue of how this memorandum of understanding would proceed. Where we are is, last week, actually candidly through the good graces of one of our commissioners, Janata, who is a friend of the lead attorney at the DPW, he was able, I think, in large part to facilitate a conversation which took place last week. And I'm going to defer to my counselors here on my deficiencies, but what that did essentially was come to a meeting of the minds where everyone was satisfied with what the language of the document shows, that the town is protected, that we will, as a result, get what appears to be, and the number is still in flux because the RFP hasn't been submitted, but $7 to $9 million gift from the state, essentially, a bonded project from the state. And just conversation a few minutes ago, Chief Fellner's been looking to see that the police department also get a site to be able to use for SWAT and tactical training 12 years after Columbine, and here we are working together. So this will be an ideal opportunity for that. The thing that was awaiting was this document being signed, and a lot of conversations between Eileen and Dick Saxel and the state attorneys, Rachel Witzel primarily. Where we are with this document is just hearing that the pen was just about ready. They've already sent teams down. They're ready to do the next phase of engineering studies to take a look at what the footprint will be. There's no foundations, it's slab, but where these burn building and classroom and apparatus buildings will be. And then put together the request for proposal, request for qualification, request for proposal, at which point, ideally 6 months from now, Commission meets again, they authorize, they essentially sign the check for that, and within a year we see a new facility. Which, and an example, because we don't have those documents yet, but an example would look something along these lines for the training apparatus building. There's something like this over in New Haven, and this is the design from Hartford, although the reason for the fold, theirs has 4 bays, ours will have 3. But when we have our architecturals, when everybody's done, this will be a model. And again, we won't go with a red. I'll take your part. We won't go with a red roof because of the way it will sit down there. We'll follow the other buildings and keep it taupes and greens and things that are environmentally comfortable for the area. So that's what we're looking at, and I think we're all. I know we're all very excited to see this day come. So thank you.
Thank you. Ellie?
And we had been actually hung up for about a year on a few words in this document until we had that meeting last week. And happily we were able to get all of our differences taken care of in a very short time. And We now do have a final memorandum of understanding. I think the most important thing for you to realize is this is not a grant from the state. The state is actually coming in and building the building. We don't have to put any money into this. Unlike most of our projects, they give us a grant, we put the money up and do the building. This is not that case. They're coming in and doing the building themselves. And although if you look at the agreement, it will tell you that the state is leaving a lot of leeway for itself. The fact that they're coming down and actually starting on the process of looking to see where they can site it indicates that they really are going to go forward and do this.
Thank you. Just a couple words on my end. I went up, was at that meeting with Eileen and Chris and Tom Bremer, and I went up, and the Commissioner of Public Works, the Acting Commissioner of Public Works was there, as well as their staff. And the two things that I think are really, I guess, most important about this, I mean, it is a regional training facility for the departments in this area of the state, and that's why the state, it's not, as much as we like to think of it as a gift, it is really a state project to enhance this fire safety of the entire area and all the departments in this area. And so the state has, what, 5 training centers around the state?
There are actually 9, and
Oh,
if
9.
the bill goes through, there'll be 10. Danbury will be the 10th.
Okay, so the state really has a commitment and a need to have these training centers for all the fire departments of the state, and we're have the good fortune of hosting one, I believe, along with the other 10 communities, because we get accrue a lot of dividends from it, in the fact that, number one, our training office is pivotal and involved in coordinating that process. We have the ability to have our troops train there, in effect, at no cost. We don't have to travel out of town. We don't have to have the wear and tear of going somewhere else to train. And so there's some really, really great things. I'm not an expert on how much better this facility will be than the existing one, but I know the existing one is very old, and the town allowed the state to use our land back in, what, the 50s, I think it started, something like that?
The state had actually, beg your pardon, the federal government had purchased the land in order to do their Nike sites back in the late 40s, beginning of 50s, and by the mid-60s, we purchased it from them.
And then
and
allowed the
have owned
state
it,
to...
and essentially, in order to get state funding by way of grants for programming, we went to being a regional school shortly thereafter. And the benefits to that not only are being able to have people come from within town and train as they were all day yesterday and in town, but able to respond. But last year's line of duty deaths in Bridgeport, when we had fire trucks from Hartford, New Haven, New London, Stamford, all lined up one route highway, because that was the staging area to cover their houses for those funerals. The fact that everyone knows of Fairfield from the fire service and the police services and CERT and the Department of Public Health, as a result of that facility, I think has gone a long way toward interoperability, toward mutual aid and a mutual understanding of how we need to respond.
And then the last thing I just want to say for the kind of full picture, the state legislature had given an authorization of funding, I think 3 or 4 years ago, for a certain amount for fire regional training centers, and the state is slowly expending that money, and I guess they feel they have enough for 2 more centers. But technically, the final go-ahead would be once they finish this bid RFP process and get a quote, then they would seek whatever the council is of the Department of Public Works would ask the governor to place it on the bond commission for final approval of those state bond funds. So that step would also have to take place, but we believe they've got the support for that. So I'll open it up first to the board and then the public. So either of you and myself have any questions or comments?
I have a question.
Jim?
I see that in the agreement that although the state is going to be paying for everything, that the building will actually be the property of the town of Fairfield, correct? What about maintenance going forward?
I think that will be our obligation.
It will and it won't, if you'll forgive me. This came up at Board of Finance, so this is a good opportunity to cover this. What has happened with the schools to date, that is to say, New Haven has just finished, Hartford has just started, is in recognition of expanded needs because of expanded facilities, we do get an annual stipend, if you will, a grant for operations. And this year it's it's $70,000, but in anticipation of that, our requests have gone to $130,000, $135,000 in the following years. That would offset any of those. The other piece is, when people use the site on nights and weekends, we actually charge a fee to cover any of the expenses. So essentially, we're a zero-sum game down there, and we include most of the maintenance. Essentially, our contract with the town, written into the way that the school was developed, is that if there are elements that the fire regional school has cost, then that is taken out from that account. If there are components that the fire department has incurred a cost on, then that comes out of the fire department.
So we're getting 70, hopefully 130.
Roughly double.
From the
as
state?
Yes.
On a yearly basis?
From the state, from a separate account that the
Mhm.
state runs to keep these 9 and then 10 schools running.
Okay, and do they send that to the town of Fairfield, or where
It
does that come
goes to the general, it doesn't go to the general fund, sorry, it goes directly into that account. It's a separate account that can, it's one of, I think, 3, I'm looking at Paul for this, that can actually carry over funds from one year to the next.
Okay.
That's how we were able to do the repairs on the burn building 2 years back.
Okay.
Is that part of that emergency management budget line, or is that a separate?
It's a separate account.
Separate
It's totally
account.
separate account. It's audited, and it's on our books, but it's not within the general fund.
It's actually double audited because they audit it and I also have to send it to the
Our
state.
auditors look at it too.
Emergency management is completely different.
Okay.
We get money for that.
Gotcha. Thanks.
That's all I have.
Thanks.
Okay.
Yep,
yeah,
fine.
Okay. And I just, I guess I'll try to do it in the form of a question, but one of the items that came up was, how to pin down the language on the cleanup cost. And we were able to share with them the documents that Rich White and Chris were able to do. They got a final phase 2 that kind of delineated and really gave a cost estimate on the estimate of whatever small cleanup there is. And if I'm saying this right, it could be as low as like around $40,000 if we're lucky. But the appropriation that we approved was around 100?
120.
120. So it was somewhere between, the estimates were 40 to 80, something like that. So my hope is that at the end of the day, we won't expend the entire appropriation that the RTM approved last summer.
And we're all on the same page, that is to say, not only town, but the DPW folks, my program manager, Dave Levitkowski, and their environmental person, Becky Cutler. We're all in that conversation and on that same page. Don't spend what you don't need. Cover what you need and remediate what's necessary, but
Thank you.
thank you.
Great, thank you. Then let me open it up to the public, or if anybody has any questions or comments on this item, please feel free to offer. Okay then. Well, we're back to the board, and as I understand it, basically this is a contract agreement the Board of Selectmen would sign. And apparently it doesn't need any other approvals, Eileen?
Correct.
And as long as the funding was approved by the RTM and all that, it was basically the concept of this was presented. So this is kind of within the same framework that we presented to the other town boards last summer. It's just detailing the agreement. Okay. Then hearing no other discussion from the board, looks like, we made a motion in the beginning? We didn't. Okay. I read the item, but I forgot to ask for a motion and second. So would somebody like to
Motion to
move this
approve.
item to?
Second.
Sherry's made a motion to approve, and Jim has seconded it. And hearing no further discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Carries unanimously. Good job. Thank you very much,
Thank you
gentlemen
very
and
much.
ladies.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eileen.
Thanks,
Forgive me, I'll get back to it. Fire marshal.
Okay, the next item on our agenda is an item that I've actually requested to have on the agenda. So let me just read it and move it into discussion. To hear, consider, and approve a resolution authorizing the Board of Finance to approve future salaries for town elected officials pursuant to Section 5.2 of the Charter. Let me move this for discussion purposes and possible approval. If there's a second.
Second.
Thanks, Sherry. Let me just describe for a minute the genesis of this. As you recall, some of you, about 3 weeks ago, there was a Board of Finance meeting, and the Board of Finance, as part of the budget process, normally reviews and sets a salary for the members of the Board of Selectmen, the first selectman, the registrar of voters, the town clerk. And the Board of Finance asked for some additional information and an opinion about some of that process. And Assistant Town Attorney Kennelly and Town Attorney Saxel issued a letter to the Board of Finance, and as a result of that letter, it caused a bit of, maybe lack of a better word, a bit of confusion in the way the process has been over the years that the town has used. And so I offered to kind of research it a little bit and to try to see what else we could provide in the way of information before the RTM meeting in May. And so I spoke to Dick and Eileen, and as you know, I briefed you briefly in executive session last week just about the concept of looking into a way to see if we could deal with this, even though we didn't have any formal discussion. But I was concerned about the kind of lack of clarity that was left at the end of the Board of Finance meeting. And so the simple question that I kind of asked the town attorney and assistant town attorney, deputy town attorney, was if the charter under state statute allows the salaries to be set by the Board of Selectmen under this section .52, which the charter does state, could the selectmen not do what is in practice having been done for the last 40 years at least, and that is to authorize the Board of Finance to set those salaries on our behalf. And so Dick and Eileen discussed it a little bit, and we came up with this motion that I'd like to kind of present under this discussion. So I guess what I'll do is let me read it, and then just give you one or two more thoughts about it, and then open it for discussion. The motion reads as follows. Be it resolved that the Board of Selectmen, pursuant to Section 5.2 of the Charter, hereby authorize the Board of Finance to vote and set a salary level for full-time and part-time non-union elected officials who serve as town officers of the town, specifically including the following elected town officers, part-time members of the Board of Selectmen, the first selectman, part-time registrars of voters, and the town clerk. During the annual budget process for the upcoming budget year, for any new term that is scheduled to start for each such elective position and for that said budget, including all salary compensation on an annual basis. And that said budget, including all such salary compensation on an annual basis, shall be submitted to the RTM for budget adoption. So the theory was basically that by doing this, we could help clear this process up and make it a simple process, working very much in the same manner that the town has operated for decades. Just for an interesting anecdotal story, I did try, with Paul's help, Paul Hiller's help, tried to go back to some of our longest-serving town employees that might have been involved in this process in the past. And the two people that we talked to, one was Ed Bowman, currently Assistant Director of Public Works, but Ed served as the assistant to the First Selectman and worked in the First Selectman's office for a number of years in the 1970s, I guess. I'm not sure if it went back to the 60s, but definitely in the 1970s. And Jack Leahy. Jack, as you know, was the Chief Fiscal Officer of the town all the way from the 60s to the end of my first term, when he retired after about 35 years. And it was interesting because what they said the practice was that during John Sullivan's era, the First Selectman never went to the Board of Selectmen, never discussed this in the history of the Board of Selectmen, ironically. But the First Selectman actually went to a Board of Finance meeting in those days and presented what the First Selectman felt should be the salary for his fellow colleagues on the Board of Selectmen, and would present it to the Board of Finance as his recommendation, and then would say to the Board of Finance, but you should set my salary, but I'm making a recommendation for my colleagues. Somehow over the time between John and Jackie and Paul and myself and John Mitsopoulos, at some point, I'm guessing during Jackie Durrell's years, but I couldn't quite get the year, that step of the First Selectman making a recommendation kind of went by the wayside, and the Board of Finance just started acting on it as part of their regular process during their budget vote. So that was the practice. I know under municipal bargaining, past practice often becomes law under collective bargaining, just for the record. So my feeling was if we can try to incorporate that practice in a more formal way, that would be a healthy exercise instead of trying to change the whole approach. So that was what led to this wording that obviously is open to editing, and suggested changes or not being adopted at all if you felt differently. But I would like to recommend that we do something like this, because I think if we could do something today, that it would help give the RTM more guidance based on the town attorney's recommendations. It would give them kind of a complete picture.
Motion to discuss this?
Well, we did, no, that was what we did when we
That's-
opened it.
we did-
When
okay.
we made a motion to
That was
discuss.
All right,
Yeah.
go ahead, sorry.
So we haven't moved it for a vote yet, and we can obviously, move this specific language for a vote when we're ready to, but I wanted to just open it for discussion first and kind of do a little roundtable. And do you want, maybe before Paul, do you have anything else that you want to add on what I was saying, or Eileen, or Dick? I mean, if there's anything that I missed, or that you want to, or if you want to just summarize what your memo said, I know we all got it, but if there's anything you want to add, please feel free.
I think you summarized the history of it, as far as what was, in my recollection, both in my tenure here and prior to that also being on the Board of Finance. And frankly, the procedure had never been questioned before.
To me, it seems amazing that we've gone 40 or 50 years that it's in the charter, clearly what the procedure is, and the town has followed a different procedure the entire time.
It's one of those anomalies, yeah.
And then during probably 4 or 5 charter revisions, this has never come up. It's kind of amazing. Clearly, this should be dealt with at a certain point during a charter revision.
That's what I would say, too. I'm just wondering, I mean, you present the budget, the first selectman presents a budget, and they're under the admin section, whatever, I think it's the admin section, right? It has salaries. So there's something that we present, we authorize, we're, sending that budget to the Board of Finance. And at that point, everybody reviews it, and so essentially, isn't that when they get an opportunity to change?
That's a good point, because we do in the budget book, it specifies salaries for those positions, and then it says as an asterisk, current salaries, I forget the wording, but current salaries to be adjusted, something like that, Paul?
Yeah,
So maybe that was in effect the
you have to look
way.
at the budget book, but I think, in the past, and obviously it only comes up because the statute is very clear. One thing that is definitive in the rest of the statute is they can only be changed in advance of the commencement of a term.
So in effect
there
before
is-
the election.
In a 4-year term, there is, and Attorney Connelly or Sasson could cite the statute, which really goes back to a situation in the 70s in Bridgeport, where that statute was changed, or actually it was a constitutional change in the state constitution, which allows, you set it for the duration of the term, with the exception when there is a 4-year term, that it can be modified at the interim point, at the 2-year level. And, in the first selectman's recommendation, during my tenure, the first selectman has never made a recommendation. It's always been, and for budgetary purposes, we've just carried that same number forward into what would be the new term, realizing that the Board of Finance would likely make some modification to inflationary pressures, let's say. And that's where the issue came up this past year for the first time in my recollection.
Well, by virtue of the fact that we're putting forth the same number, we're still putting forth a number that's in the budget. I mean, otherwise you wouldn't have a bottom line number, there'd be a hole. So whether it's any thought process goes into it, doesn't really matter. We're still putting forth the number. So once it gets to the Board of Finance, they could do whatever they want to it. So I think it's redundant, and I don't see why, I definitely agree with Jim on the point about changing something in the charter by resolution, and I don't think that's something we want to do. I don't see any reason. It seems to me like we're already addressing it, and if we want to change that later, change it when a charter gets open to have changes. Now that it's come to everybody's attention that they think it's a problem. It's worked for 50
I think
years.
my worry was that the Board of Finance felt at that meeting that they had no right to vote on the salary because of what the town attorney's letter said. And I don't think that's correct, but that was the interpretation that they made, or that they were worried about. So I guess maybe Dick and Eileen, could you just, with Sherry's thought, that the fact that there's a number in the salary that's passed on from the Board of Selectmen, which the first Selectman hadn't recommended, but then the Board of Selectmen actually did adopt a department with those salaries and positions listed, would that be enough to then, by practice, allow the Board of Finance to take a vote to change those numbers? And then but then the question becomes, well, does that mean theoretically the RTM could reduce those numbers? So I guess those are the questions. I personally think it would be better to have a procedure that sounds clearer, but I'm open to a suggestion here. So I guess the question is, what do you think about what Sherry's saying in terms of the fact that the budget has something and then it gets modified? And who can modify it? So whoever wants to take a stab here.
Well, let's see, I've served on 2 charter revision commissions, I've served on 2. This is never an issue before. The first thing is, it's functionally, it's de minimis. It's not a big deal. There's precedent for taking authority and allowing people to act for you. I mean, on minor land use issues, for example, the staff can sign over the counter and things like that. I think that what Sherry points out is valid, that by the fact that there is a budget which is reviewed by, it's proposed by the first selectman, but it's reviewed by the Board of Selectmen, then goes to the Board of Finance. I think it actually is living within the letter of the 5.2 of the charter. I think also that, it's like everything else. It's part of the budget process, and the Board of Finance has done what the Board of Finance has considered appropriate, and I think it would go on from there. I don't know that this is belt and suspenders. I don't know that it's necessary. I think it's like the law pointed out, it's an anomaly. I mean, we haven't had to deal with this in all these years. Now that we've looked at it, the process is, you can entirely delegate, but you're really only making recommendations to the Board of Finance anyway, which is what you are doing when you give them a budget to start looking at. So it's 6 of one or half a dozen of the other. I don't know that you really need this.
Eileen, any other?
I would agree that, it's, what Sherry says is, I think, very valid, that you actually are putting a number before the Board of Selectmen. That is part of the budget that you all vote on. And the Board of Finance, I'm sorry if they misunderstood it, they certainly have the right under budget process to make changes in those numbers. So I think that technically the charter section has been followed, although admittedly not with the understanding that everyone kind of had about what was being done. If you go back far enough, actually, and it is quite a ways back, close to when the charter was originally adopted, the first selectman's salary, the Board of Finance salary, actually was put forward by the Board of Selectmen more explicitly to the Board of Finance. In effect, and the further away you got from that original charter, it just didn't happen after a while. So you're kind of now doing implicitly what once upon a time was done more explicitly.
Here's my issue with not doing something, and just to play devil's advocate a little bit. If we don't take any action to kind of specify that we want the Board of Finance to take this action each 4 years or 2 years or whatever the case might be, it sets up a situation where, a first selectman or a Board of Selectmen could decide to push higher or lower salaries in the future for themselves. And it just seems to me to not make sense that a board has a vote on its own salaries. That we would have to recuse ourselves from that if we were thinking of it in the terms that we were voting on that item for ourselves. And when we did a little survey of other communities, almost every one of them, there is no community that CCM could find that that has a Board of Selectmen vote on its.
There was at least one.
There was one?
Yeah.
Okay. But most of them, either a Board of Finance or a council in some cases, made those votes. So I just thought it was cleaner to try to come up with a way to say to the Board of Finance, hey, we want you to make this decision for us or for future boards, because that would be a cleaner way to do it. But
I think
obviously
next
charter
time we
would-
change the charter, we can
would
look at
certainly-
that and address it and make it more clear, like the first charter if we want, or change the terms to say that the Board of Finance initiates that. I don't,
And I agree with Sherry, and I also think that at that time, just like it came up at the Board of Finance meeting, that maybe other forms of that person's compensation should be looked at, or at least for the charter revision to consider it, is whether, who determines what the compensation package is as a whole, meaning that if certain unions over the next couple of years go to defined, go from defined benefit to defined contribution, but the first selectman stayed at a pension, you know, we might want to have somebody have to take a look at that. And I think it should just all be addressed at the time of charter revision and spend some time on that issue.
I do want to say for the record, I did ask Sherry and Jim promise to vote unanimously for every item today. But it just goes to show the limits of
lame duck.
the limits of one's. So you really think that it doesn't need to have more guidance? I mean, the most important thing to me was that there's no, and Eileen, just, if I could just, on this one item, just make one thing for the record clear. Yeah, Eileen, let me just ask one last question, just to make sure we're all clear on this. So is what the town attorney's office saying is that the action taken by the Board of Finance to set their recommendation, that there's nothing improper about that vote? Because the one thing I want to make clear is that we want the RTM to know that we believe the Board of Finance vote is a sanctioned vote, and that they had the authority to say that change to what we had in the budget. So it is clear they had that right to make that change.
Yes, they did, and I was just asking Paul whether indeed this whole thing is settled for the next 4 years, because they did vote that interim increase in the second year, after the second year.
Right.
So I think this is a settled issue, at least for the next 4 years, and maybe in that time, there will be a charter revision commission that can spell out the process better.
Okay, and then the only other question, I hesitate to ask it, but in case, you know what, I'm not going to ask it, but I would just say to you that the attorney's office should be prepared that if an RTM member asks, well, if we wish to modify this salary, do we have that right? Obviously, they can't go up in any budget line, but this is not a budget line. So I don't believe, in my opinion, from my knowledge of the budget process and what the charter says, I don't believe the RTM can set salaries. They vote on budget lines. So I don't quite understand where, I hear what you're saying, I hope you're right, everybody's right, but I thought they could set budget lines and reduce what the Board of Finance recommended.
I think the final resolution does both set the budget and the salaries.
It has that specific language?
I believe it does.
So you think theoretically they could then adjust those salaries?
I think so.
Okay, I mean, I'm just trying to make this a little clearer.
If I'm not mistaken, I think the notice for the meeting, which would be officially the notice for the meeting of May 2nd, at the annual meeting, lists the gross budget, receipts, the tax levy, and it also does list in that notice the specific salaries of those 4 offices.
Okay.
And I know in the public, in the notice that we, under the charter, had to publish within the newspapers, which was published last week or so, it does specifically list what I'll call the intended salaries for those positions for the ensuing 2 years.
Okay, and they can go theoretically adjust down but not up, so.
Theoretically, although I don't know that it's ever been done, but yes, I think theoretically it could have been.
Yeah, theoretically.
Right now, of course, my understanding was the Board of Finance made it level, correct?
Board of Finance in their motion kept the salaries at the same level for the next 2 years.
And then adjusted it up.
And that salary actually commences at the inception of the term, which is in mid-November, when the board would officially take office or be sworn in. And that would continue for 2 years again to November of 13, and then there is a 3% increase over the current salary levels.
Which was the same thing they did last time. They
Right.
voted the salary at the beginning and at a midpoint. And then the Board of, the RTM will in 2 years have to vote that 2% again as part of the budget process now.
Okay, thank you. Just from the board, any other comments or questions? To the public, if there are any comments or questions, Mrs. Ewing?
Having served on the charter revision, leave people in the room, I think Sherry's correct. I think this is a non-issue. I don't understand the problem unless you, as a group, want to raise your salaries, then I think the public would not be happy to hear that. But you need to put an item in the budget, and the various boards and commissions and the RTM can deal with that. And And I don't think that's a problem. You can keep the same salary as in that line. And the other thing is, you don't have to wait until a charter revision, as I understand it, and Eileen can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a couple times ago, we made a special sentence or statement in there that if a department wished to
Appeal.
change the charter because their circumstances changed, that you could have an ordinance go before the RTM and change the charter by ordinance.
That was
And
if there were,
then-
if there were departments that were to be combined or separated.
Was that all
was
it
what it was
refers to?
about, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, okay, she's correcting me. And, but I thought you could do something in between, but apparently
Okay,
not.
thanks.
But I don't see this as a big issue at all, I think.
Well, let me tell you why it was an issue. It was an issue because the Board of Finance almost didn't vote on salaries. Almost 4 of them said they could not vote, should not vote, and I lobbied them to vote, and Dick and Eileen weren't able to be there. They spent an hour discussing this.
I was there.
So it was an issue that they felt was a problem. So that's why I felt we should address it. So, but that's okay. I'm not, I think this helps clear up the process, whichever way it goes. At least Sherry's question was, there was a budget recommended with certain salaries, even though they were changed, and the process wasn't in violation of anything, so that's good to hear.
Probably the only reason it came up this year is because 4 members of the Board of Finance recused themselves because they're going to be running for first
Yeah.
selectman, so
There were
they
3.
felt there was or 3 announced. So they're thinking there might be a conflict, but then again, if they did vote to increase the salary, go to the RTM, and the RTM could say, cut it if they felt that it was inappropriate. I think at this point, how much more than your salary does the superintendent of schools make? You run the town, and I know he's got a PhD, and you have a master's degree, so tell me, what's the salary? It's almost double, or maybe it's more than double now. So
The job market works in mysterious ways.
it does, and I'm just saying that, I think at this point, I don't think we have to worry about you being, the first selectman being overpaid right now.
The selectmen are being underpaid.
There's another issue.
Just remember, quotes can be taken out of context.
Glad
Okay.
you said that.
Well, I was hoping that we do a resolution to clarify it, but I hear what my colleagues are saying. We moved and seconded discussing this. I didn't put forward formal language for a vote. I guess what I do is, let me, I'm asking if one would like to second, I'd like to make a motion to have this language considered, but if there's no second, we would discuss it any further. I'm sorry, was there any other public comment on this item? Okay, I do think it would be helpful for us to say we want the Board of Finance to set the salary, so I would like to recommend this motion to be considered, and would move that motion and ask if there's a second, but my sense is there probably will not be a second. So hearing that there's no second, we will not take a vote on this item. Thank you. And thank you for the discussion, and I think hopefully this will help at least explain the process of it for the full RTM if and when they discuss it further. Thank you very much. The next item on our agenda is another item. This actually is a amendment that I'm suggesting to the board. Let me just read it to you, ask for a motion to consider it, and then explain. Well, let me start by saying, about a year ago, if you remember, we approved the town bodies approved, or we approved a grant application for up to $400,000 for a steep grant with the original intent to take that gardener's cottage that was behind the Carrollton and turn it into a visitor center for the Chamber of Commerce, and a Chamber of Commerce facility at the rec center. At the Board of Finance, that item didn't get pursued, but because of the time period I had applied for the grant, and when we made our motions to the Board of Finance, that grant had been awarded for $100,000, and part of that original grant application actually was for $200,000 also to refurbish the conservation barn up at Hoyden's Hill. But anyway, out of the $200,000 for the idea of a visitor center, they awarded $100,000. So my thought was, we got a letter from the state about 2 or 3 months ago, asking the office for the status of the project and whether we wish to pursue the funding of the $100,000. And so I had a conversation with Patricia Ritchie, and then actually had some conversations with Mark Barnhart, and one conversation with Joe Devoncheck. And I think this was actually an idea that came from my office, a Deputy Chief of Staff, Ms. Carpenter, who came to me and said, you know, I hate to see the town lose this money. How about if we find another location for the visitor center? And what do you think about using our Fairfield Center train station building and using part of that building for a visitor center? And it was kind of like a light bulb going off. And I actually thought it was a really interesting idea. So I talked with Patricia and with Joe and with Mark, and we talked a little about it. And the concept that basically got crystallized as a proposal, if we feel comfortable making this modification, would be, and we have had conversations with OPM, and they are supportive of this if we get the DOT's permission. But the reason I bring it to you is basically to take it to the next step and try to see if we can get a final agreement with the state. The idea would be that because the state decided, unfortunately, to close down the ticket office in the New York-bound side of the Fairfield Center train station, there's an empty spot there right in the middle of the building. And there's also an area around it that is fairly, minimally used. There's a person who sells newspapers on one side, but there's an area that we figured out would be around 100 square feet, maybe 150 square feet between the booth and expanding one side of the booth and renovating the area, that could be turned into, using the booth and then expanding it a little bit, turning it into an area for a visitor center exhibit, for programmatic information about the town or about economic development of the town to be placed. And the Chamber of Commerce's idea, what Patricia's idea was, that the Chamber's interest would be in trying to develop a program where the Chamber would man it with volunteers that the Chamber would seek to find among seniors, possibly, would man it for at least 10 to 15 hours a week, and would actually have a kind of active visitor center, perhaps in the morning rush hour, or perhaps on the weekend, on Saturday mornings, at times when we think there would be a number of people in the building, so that, information about town could be disseminated. We also talked a little about, could there be some other place along Post Road, which is where the Chamber is interested in doing their operations. They want to stay very much in Fairfield Center. But the problem we found out from the state is that if we were to try to find a private location and sublet it, the state grant is not eligible unless the town owns the property. So it makes our options very limited. So basically what this notion would be to ask the state DOT to grant us permission to create an area in there, turn it into a exhibit area. Some of it could just be, on a wall, things that people could read. Some of it could be at a table that would be manned by volunteers. Mark's office is obviously interested in helping on this. Whether or not he would be able to handle a few hours a week with staff, I don't know. But the idea of a volunteer program seemed to make some sense. So with that said, I gave you some documentation, and I guess I would just, again, I didn't make the motion to start the conversation. I just moved consideration of this item to approve a resolution to accept a grant in the amount of $100,000 and to authorize an agreement to create a Town Chamber of Commerce Visitor Center to be located at the Fairfield Center train station. And that would be the seconded by Sherry for discussion. So that's the concept, and go from there.
Really dumb question.
Sherry?
And I think the answer must be that we own the train station and not Metro North or the state, right, DOT?
No, actually, the state,
Oh.
Metro North owns the
Well,
train
then
station.
Didn't you just say that the grant was only good if we own the property?
Well, we in the state, I mean, it has to be public property. It can't be
Okay.
private property.
Not
is
just
the way I
town-owned
said it.
property, but
Yeah.
state or
So
federal.
if DOT says, hey, you can have a 10-year lease or 50-year lease to use this area, technically, by the way, the parking authority has a lease for the building for the purposes of maintaining it. But the parking authority, for example, didn't run the person who ran the ticket booth. That was a state employee. But the parking authority does do any concessions that are in those facilities, and that money goes toward the upkeep of the station. So when the station was rehabbed and the new roof was put on, I think it was like 3 or 4 years ago, the parking authority managed that work. The DOT had to approve it, but they managed the work. So this would almost be like a sublet of a sublet, so to speak. But the ticket booth area, the parking authority technically didn't have, they have a key, but they didn't run it. So that still, I think, is under Metro North auspices. So,
So you're going to use this to renovate part of the space, half the space is going to be used for
yeah,
this?
it's too small. It's only about probably like 7 feet by 5 feet. I mean, it's a pretty small area. So the thought would be to expand, to take that width where the ticket person was behind the thing and basically bump it out, open up where the window was and make that whole front a window area. But we probably should try to get some advice from an architect. I mean, that's just the concept. Someone might say there's a better way to do it, or maybe they say to just put a partition up and have it open, that you can walk in.
I don't commute, so I haven't been there in the early mornings. I've only been there after it's closed and on weekends. So is it used for anything right now that the ticket person's gone?
Yeah, the only thing, I actually went in there, the only thing that they use it for is they keep a couple of cleaning tools in there. That's it.
No, I mean that whole space, not just.
The whole
Oh,
station.
yeah.
The whole
Oh, yeah.
station space. What's
Oh,
it
yeah.
being used for?
Well, a waiting area for people.
Oh,
that
it's
are
still
taking
open for the
train.
waiting.
Yeah.
I just didn't know if
No, it's
that,
pretty
once
much
they got rid of the
Heated
ticket.
while they're waiting for the train?
Yeah, that's
maybe?
fine. I'm glad they're doing that. And the
And the
bathrooms are
bathrooms.
open. That's what I want.
So it's functioning the same as it had except for the
Right.
ticket booth.
Okay, I just wanted to be sure that it was being, so now just, that'll still remain the same, and we'll just expand that little ticket
Right,
booth
not taking
area
too big an
slightly.
area, just maybe 10 by 10.
And that'll be lockable, I assume, so whatever things they need to leave in there, that. they-
Try to figure out a way to do that, yeah.
Okay.
You know, maybe it would have I mean, there's a few ideas, you know, maybe you can
Like
have it up and
garage,
down
yeah.
thing.
Mhm. Open
But it's
the
kind of
door.
an interesting idea, and you know, Patricia really liked the idea. It wouldn't be their office space, so they wouldn't be able to move into there. It would strictly be for use for kind of, you know, promoting town and chamber programs. Jim?
It sounds like a good idea. It seems like $100,000 is a hell of a lot of money to be
Yeah,
spending at that one space. It seems to me that you could probably, for $20,000 or less, be able to put up some walls and to have this space be there. And I guess my other thought is that really centrally located enough? Like if you did something, say, by the Sherman Green, by the gazebo, but not at the gazebo, maybe towards the front, could you build some type of structure, whether it be attached to the bus stop station, or something that would be more located, centrally located as a visitor center in downtown Fairfield, with $100,000? It's a lot of money. And build something that would be more centrally located for the chamber, you know, to hand out stuff for people who are coming into the downtown, which our downtown's gotten pretty busy. I guess that's, my only question is whether that's the best space for it, or whether with $100,000, you could actually do something right, you know, because right in that center of town, right where I'm talking about, we have all those signs that are above for every event that's coming up. It's kind of a centrally located space to have something. And I know you said that the chamber was looking to have something centrally located, like on Post Road or near the center of town. And I don't know whether you guys have thought about this and whether I'm just like,
Well,
you
you
know,
know,
asking
there
questions
may
that
be
you've
a
already
way-
answered.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good, personally, I had not, but there may be a way to modify the wording of this to make it a little more open-ended.
Mhm.
Because I agree, I also thought 100,000 was kind of a high number, but that was the amount approved, and certainly, you know, I didn't want to undercut us and
Yeah.
then find out that there's wires and wiring for light or whatever.
Yeah.
But,
Just seems like it's right on the Post Road, there would be
there was-
access to phone, there'd be access to
Yeah.
electricity right there. I mean, whether they need a bathroom there, I don't know, but I mean,
Well,
I don't know, I'm just wondering with $100,000, whether we could more centrally locate something.
Well, let me throw one other thought
Sure.
on this. One of the other ideas that the office staff talked about, because Jen and Lauren and I bounced this around a few times, Lauren Lanham actually had a thought of, couldn't we do some artwork in the area of the train station, or even going toward the gazebo, and have a little more of an artistic touch in that focal area of town where we've done so much streetscape work. There were a few different ideas. We were just trying to figure out how to keep this
Mhm.
kind of simple. One thought could be to phrase this, you know, to be located at Fairfield Center train station and/or other locations in the Fairfield Center
Center of
area.
town, yeah.
And even put in the application that we're interested in creating
Mhm.
some artwork as part of it. You know, maybe some permanent art exhibit or sculpture or something like that. I mean, I'm open to suggestion. I just think
Yeah.
having a grant in hand.
Oh, I would like to get the grant, I'm just questioning if we can broaden the language and then figure it out.
Yeah, if we can
You know,
come up
not
with
today,
some
but
language.
put some
I'll
thought
open it to
into
the public in a second, and we can work on language while the public's speaking, but any last thoughts before?
was anything thought about with respect to the last proposal? I know the question of the rent came up, and mostly, I think, the concern about the people who were trying to renovate the building not being able to come up with the cash to be able to do that and generate the funds based on the economy, and how much it would cost to maintain that old building. But what about putting together a structure in the same type of spot, like over in the parking lot across the street, which is right on the post road, right on Mill Plain Road as you come in, it's walking distance from the train station. It doesn't address your rental issue, but, every other issue, you could do artwork upstairs because you wouldn't have to, pay homage to the builder of the little home. So, and you could build a more usable structure, basic squared off, two-story structure that looks like a little.
I just know for 100,000, with public bidding and all that, if we had to do a foundation or any work, it's going to go
Could be on slab.
fast. But it
Doesn't have to be.
it's probably limited how much we can do, but perhaps the way to do it is to keep, and ask, my successor to keep kind of fine-tuning this, but to at least have a concept sense of this. We don't have to, there wasn't a deadline on getting this to them. I just wanted to make sure we started a process. We do need to give them a final plan by June 30th, because the money is obligated. The money doesn't have to be spent in the same year, but it has to be obligated by June 30th. So this could be one where we fine-tune it and not make a final wording vote today. I'm open to,
Yeah, I'd rather keep it broad-based and maybe
Yeah, make
have
the
a
call to
broad,
that.
and talk to the chamber about what their thoughts are, like, expanding this idea. I think they liked your idea, but if they maybe talked about if they could have a booth or something that was more permanent but was in the downtown, they might
Give you some
prefer
work.
that.
Okay, so why don't we open up to the public for a few minutes, and then we'll take it back. Mr. Spino.
No, I was
Jerry?
just gonna say that contemporary exhibition services usually have audio-visual, interactive, which is not inexpensive, thus, your budget. If there is a lavatory in that space, that's a nice courtesy to visitors to the town. Sherry, in relation to building a building, I think Ken is probably right. If you build a building, you might push the budget even more, but you guys are in charge, but those are just my thoughts. I think, like I say, contemporary exhibition services usually include audiovisual, interactive audiovisual, that sort of thing, aside from just pamphlets.
Sure.
And that sort of thing. So.
We could have a meet your old first selectman in town and invite us all back to do a little cameo.
There you go. Hi, I'm Ken.
I couldn't
Welcome
resist.
back.
Well, I was thinking of 3 or 4 of us. 2 or 3 of us. Okay, any other thoughts from the public on this item? No? Judy, Mr. Ewing?
I too question $100,000. It was a lot of money. I think this gentleman had some ideas about how we could spend it, but are there any requirements or strings attached to this as to what?
It's a
is
good question.
expected?
I can give you actually a very good answer. This is one of the few state grants or federal grants, to my knowledge, that has no strings attached, other than the community expends the money in the concept form that the money is dedicated for. It's one of the most, the STEEP grant and what they call a Small Cities Urban Grant are literally grants to a community for a purpose that the governing body says the community needs. The legislation says it's supposed to have some economic development aspect to it, but I will tell you that if you look at the list of STEEP grants each year, they include playing field, contributions toward new playing fields, contributions toward, we got $400,000 toward the rehab of Penfield, which we put in the application as a regional attraction, but it's used for a fairly wide array of purposes. But it really is, there's no match required from the community, and it really is a state grant to further projects that the community feels they just can't fund. So it's a kind of wide open grant. There's also no, how do I say it? And Paul's not here anymore. You basically literally just submit the bill and you get a reimbursement. There's no, the only thing that's audited is that it's for the facility. It has to be, I believe, an infrastructure type of a program. Can't be for operating costs. That's the only other restriction. but it literally just has to be shown it was used for that facility. I guess while we're talking about all these different ideas, I should tell the board, the other idea Mark and I discussed with Patricia that we did bandy about a little bit was there's another space on Uncowa Road, the upper part of the 70 Sanford Street building where the theater is, and the Arts Council is, if Sherry remembers this one well, because Sherry and I talked about it a number of years ago. We talked about, could we apply this grant toward rehabbing that space, which is right on Uncowa Road, but the problem is, there are two problems. One is, Rich White and Mark looked at it, and Rich estimated $200,000 to $300,000 at least to retrofit that space, because it would have to be sprinklered, apparently. And the other thing is, the space has a five-foot gangplank, for lack of a better word. You know, there's about a 10-foot drop between the street and the building, of about 5 to 10 feet long, and there's a walkway, this kind of a wooden, kind of closed plank that would have to be turned into a walkway, which we could do, you know, with a railing and all that stuff, but it would be a much more expensive project. If we got $400,000, I would have been very eager to try that, because I think that would have been more visible, would have been on the way to the train station, on the way to downtown. But unfortunately, we didn't get a big enough grant. Now, we could apply for a second round next year, you know, the next cycle. So I just wanted to mention that idea came up too, which would be almost similar to what you were saying. So why don't we do this? So do you want to have a sense of the body then? I mean, think of, how about if I propose a substitute motion to have a sense of the body that the first selectman continue to pursue a final proposal for accepting this steep grant by June and present it back to the Board of Selectmen, you know, as soon as possible.
Okay.
Unless
Is that
you
okay?
can just edit the train station part to, or another downtown centrally located town, state,
I
or
mean, we could do it that
federal
way too,
property.
if you want.
Yeah, I don't mind doing it with the change of language, just
Okay,
adding
I'll tell you
on
what, then
there.
let me retract what I was saying about a sense of the body. Why don't I offer each of you, do one of you want to, Sherry, you want to propose
Tell me,
it?
you're the
I'll
lawyer,
jump.
so
I would just like to amend, I'm just going to talk about it first, but at the very end where it says to be located at Fairfield Center, or then put or another centrally located location in the downtown section of Fairfield.
do we have to say whether that it's owned by the town, state, or federal government, or will that be assumed?
I think it's a limitation on the grant
Yeah, I
itself,
think
right?
it's kind of
Okay,
assumed in
okay,
there.
as long as it's assumed, great.
So do you want to say to be located at Fairfield Center
Center
at
type?
such places as the train station or other places, other public places downtown?
Or another downtown centrally
another-
located public property?
Or another, I like that. Or-
Actually, Jim, if you don't mind me talking as a member of the public, you said
Ms. Carpenter?
and/or, because we could do both.
Yeah,
That's a good idea.
yeah,
Can I put and/or in?
yeah, and/or.
So and/or. at-
Another downtown
Another-
centrally located public property.
Does that sound okay?
Yeah, I guess so, because it can be public, right? Or it can be state or federal government property?
I believe,
Well,
yeah.
Yeah.
I never
that's
checked
fine.
federal.
Yeah, yeah. That's fine with me.
Okay, did you get that, Jen?
Yeah.
Okay, then, is that language right, Jim? I
Yeah.
couldn't remember your first language, I'm sorry.
That's fine, it was just at the very end.
Okay, so this
And/or.
motion, which was already seconded for discussion, Sherry's made an amendment to it, which broadens it to allow for any public downtown location at a public, at the very good wording that you put forward, to allow this project to go forward in some form. I think before we vote on it as an amendment, I guess what I would suggest is that we vote on it. I would definitely support approving this, but then that we perhaps just add the language that the final plan get presented back to the Board of Selectmen by, the Economic Development Director and the first Selectman, just so that the Selectmen could hear the final thoughts on
Sure.
this.
Yes,
Okay, it doesn't have to necessarily be approved, but at least presented back for information.
yes.
Okay?
And that somebody talked to the Chamber of Commerce about another, what their thoughts
Yep.
about doing it someplace else downtown.
Okay. All right, so we have an amendment to our motion. Just on the amendment, if there's any other public comment? Then hearing none on the amendment to broaden this, to allow it to be expanded to any public locations in Fairfield Center downtown.
Sherry seconded.
Sherry moved the amendment.
I move-
Jim.
And-
Jim.
Oh. or Jim,
Moving it?
did you move it?
I think I might have started moving it right at the beginning, so, yeah.
Okay, and Sherry
That's
seconded
fine.
it?
Yep.
Okay, then we all have it pretty well down?
Yes.
All in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Aye?
Aye.
Carries unanimously. And then we're on the main motion as amended to have the steep grant accepted and to try to put this project together for a visitor center for our downtown area with the help of the Chamber of Commerce. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, carries unanimously. Okay, great. As I said before, there's no private executive session. We covered that last time, and there was no new business on that. And just to the board, if there's any new business.
The only thing I wanted to bring up under new business was, you're resigning on the Thursday,
I don't know, the 28th.
28th, which is Thursday, right? Okay. Between now and then, do you see any major things that are going to affect the town going forward? Any things you're going to sign?
Man, I'm putting a list together.
No. I just think that based on that, your status, that if there's anything large that you're going to be signing us up for,
Yeah, no, that's
we should have notice of it.
Yeah, well,
And
the
some
good
of the
news
things,
is-
I know you have a lot of contracts and
Yeah.
that are in negotiations, and it just seems to me that at this point, you probably shouldn't sign. I mean, I'm just asking you as a member of the Board of Selectmen that, I don't want to, I guess I'd be surprised if I read something that
something
all of a sudden you
unexpected.
signed something on Thursday at 4 o'clock
Right.
that bound the town to a lot of money
Right.
for 4 years.
Well, here's the
going
good
forward.
news. There's no
Okay.
plans to have any, what do they call that, lame duck actions? No big appointments that I'll make on Thursday, the 28th. But I will, just for the board, there are 2 collective bargaining contracts that have been in process over the last month or 2 that were basically finalized over the last few weeks, that if they go forward, the unions, 2 of the unions may ratify, but this wasn't because of the timing. It was something that literally one of them was voted on by a union a month ago, rejected, and we modified a couple of things to see if we could get it reconsidered by that unit. And the other one was very much, under negotiation. So I don't know if those will be finished by the 28th or not, but if the union ratifies what the negotiating team had proposed, then certainly I'll probably sign the thing to forward it to the RTM. But it's not, there won't be anything very different or inconsistent. I guess I would phrase it this way. I got to be careful, Dick, because we're talking collective bargaining. There wouldn't be anything in anything that I would do on collective bargaining that would be inconsistent with information that's been presented so far to the RTM on collective bargaining matters so far. So, for example, if the THEA contract is before them Monday night, there may be one unit that may have an agreement that may follow some of the terms of that, but you won't see major differences.
What happens if the RTM doesn't approve the contract on Monday night? Is that going to
That-
change
then
your
the-
stance on those other contracts?
Well, it's not up to me, it's up to the unit, because our team had some proposals before certain units over the last 2 months.
Mhm.
And certain units have said, well, we want to wait and not talk about it. We've kind of held off in bargaining. One unit's going to arbitration. But a couple of units have continued discussions with the town attorney and the HR director. And they, in one case recently, in one case a few weeks ago, got to the point where they felt that they had a pretty good package. And so, if those go forward. But again, if they do, the RTM would get those agreements in May. So there wouldn't be an agreement I could sign and enforce the town. It's up to the RTM. But beyond a few collective bargaining items, there's really nothing of significance, to my knowledge, that's what I would call anything new. There's always a lot of day-to-day stuff, but there's no big agreements obligating town funds. There's what I'm doing, just so you folks as a board know, my office is in the process of putting together kind of a work list for the incoming first selectman, which obviously would be Sherry at some point on the 28th. There's actually, similar to the date of the inauguration, there's no formal time that this power transfer effectuates. It's normally at the end of the date, because the statutes only have a date. They don't have an hour of a day. So when I took office each time, I used to ask that question, when do I formally take office? And I was told by my predecessor, first selectman, well, it's at midnight on the day of what the charter says, or midnight at the end of the day of what the charter says. So in this case, even though we'll be passing the gavel, and I'm actually probably going to have a little, thing with Sherry, it probably doesn't formally take effect till midnight of that night, but just because things worked out dates. But it's the weird things about. But so the close of business will be defined by the town attorney, whatever they say is the close of business, whether it's midnight or 4:30. But anyway, no, I mean, it's really just kind of putting together a list of,
Yeah.
hey, here's the things coming up as work chores over the next few months, few weeks.
Mhm.
I've actually been having meetings with our main departments, just kind of going over, okay, we still under budget, is everything, any surprises I don't know about over the last
Mhm.
month that have been coming up, and thankfully, we're in pretty good shape. So, so hopefully, it will be a smooth process and there won't be too many surprises.
If there is any of these new contracts that come to fruition next week, I still think that it should be, I personally think that it should wait till Sherry to be in
Yeah.
place, because she's going to be the one that has to report to the taxpayers, because she's still going to be going from selectman to first selectman, then at some point, unless she changes her mind and doesn't want to do it, I'd love for her to do it, but if she didn't do it, she'll still be here to report to the taxpayers. Dick and your legal team and whoever on the negotiating team could probably fully fill her in on the history. It just seems to me, I just don't, and I think it protects you, to be quite honest with you, for someone saying you signed something going out the door.
Listen, I hear what you're saying, but very honestly, constitutional law is very clear. The president gets to make his decisions up until the last day he's in office, and the first selectman gets to make decisions up until the last day he's or she's in office, and that's the way it works. And I have the responsibility of doing that, and I appreciate your thoughts, but and I'll take it under advisement. But I would say that it would be ridiculous for a system of government to say to elected officials, well, in the last month, something's different. You shouldn't do anything the way you've been doing it for a year or 10 years. So, I mean, I appreciate the concern, but I think it's I would say don't worry. I think, the responsibility lies with the person if they take an action and, they face the consequences. But I'm just saying to you as a board that regardless of, that's my power, that's my authority. Regardless of that, I'm not doing anything that will be a surprise to you, I don't think, I promise.
And I'm not trying to challenge your authority. I think
Yeah.
you have authority up until whatever time that is that you decide that you have the power. But I will tell you that both from things that have happened, and let's just look at the presidential level on my side of the aisle and your side of the aisle, when people do this and it comes out in the press afterwards, it looks horrible.
Yeah, I agree.
It looks horrible, and I just want to say that I would just hope that that wouldn't happen, and that's just my statement, is that I would hope that it wouldn't happen, but I understand there's nothing that I could do to prevent it.
Yeah, well, the good news is it's not happening, but I think
Okay.
the worst thing would be if we had a process, say, of bargaining for 4 months that was almost finished. The worst thing is to say at the last minute to 80 employees, well, we're having a change, and because that date happens to be there, you can't have what we discussed for 4 months as
Yeah.
a proposal. And, just, for the record, the proposals I'm trying to negotiate are hardcore proposals with a lot of givebacks. This is a tough time to negotiate contracts, but I don't think anybody coming in will find it any easier to negotiate with the units, than I have. It's not like, the unit's going to say, well, I'm worried now. They're going to negotiate hard and try to, protect their rights, no matter who's here. And that's their right.
Well, I understand what Jim's saying, and you're you, and you're making decisions based on your experience, but you do leave on the 28th, and there's nobody, whoever comes in next just takes whatever's there if you sign off on a
Yeah,
contract
but
that's
the
going to go
RT
on for 4 years. Yeah, the RTM could do
Yeah,
something.
but why should,
like that.
look at the other side, why should someone coming in on the first day in office say, you know what, I don't like that idea, and I'm going to just say something totally different? Why should somebody have that right to change what a government has been doing and make
why shouldn't
perhaps
they
a
have the
worse
right to endorse it?
decision? The answer is they're accountable to the voters, and if they want to make decisions at that point, they may be better decisions, they may be worse decisions, but they're still accountable to the
Right.
voters, as I am.
Well, except that
And-
you're not going to be there.
But that's the way the process works. This could have happened with the first, Anyway, it's a moot point because there's nothing that's going to be, I think anything I do from now to then, people, I would hope the RTM will say, hey, this is pretty good. But, we'll have a test case Monday night. We'll have a contract coming to the RTM. We'll see how they feel about that contract. My guess is if that contract may guide some of what happens with a few of the other units one way or the other, I don't know. But if the RTM says, hey, wow, this is great, and there's a contract that comes a week later that's, the same terms are better, I wouldn't think anybody would be upset about it. So, anyway.
The problem with the collective bargaining is if you sign it and then the RTM turns it down, we go to arbitration.
No. The process is before arbitration, if the RTM turns a contract down, both parties have to seek to have one session of negotiating before they can then go to arbitration. But they don't have to do anything. But so I mean, there really is an opportunity to talk even during arbitration up until the last best offer. You can keep negotiating. But listen, I just, it is what it is. I mean, there's a bargaining team of 5 people. It's not just myself. And yes, the buck stops here. But the truth is, there's a personnel director, there's a town attorney, my chief of staff, there are department officials involved in these discussions. And, the Board of Selectmen doesn't happen to have a role in collective bargaining, nor does the Board of Finance, and that's state statute, and it's the way it is. So I guess I can understand why you're frustrated by that, but I think, you just have to kind of hope that the process works right. But the good, again, that I was trying to disclose to you what I could think of. That's the only thing I can think of that may happen, so I'm being very forthright here, saying, hey, this is what's in the pipeline. There's no other big project or big item that I'm aware of that.
No, it's the contracts that I guess it's the union contracts that I'm the most afraid of, to be
Yeah.
quite honest with you. Because those are the only ones I
But we
personally
can have
know of
somebody
that
here
are
who
on the
says,
horizon.
wow, that's not good enough, I want to give them something better, and then the RTM has to look at that. I mean, you never know who's coming in, what they're going to say, right?
No, you don't, you don't, except that that person at least has to look at the voters
Right.
and be here and face the public about it
Right.
and answer the questions and go to the RTM meeting and tell them
But look
why
at the
they
other
did
side,
X,
the
Y,
first
Z.
selectman who's leaving isn't moving anywhere, and he's going to be, his reputation will be out there too.
Yeah.
And so obviously, if I do something that people say, wow, what happened? It's going to kind of rebound back on me anyway. And if the RTM says they don't like it, I've already told the 2 units considering these, that if they do go forward, that I'll be at that meeting as a private citizen. So, hey, it is what it
You'll
is.
be given 1 minute to speak or 2 minutes like everybody else,
Right.
and Sherry's going to be up there having to defend a
Well,
contract that
Marilyn-
you signed and
Nothing to do
say,
with-
well, what is she supposed to say? I don't agree with this, but
Well, that's
somebody
what-
else signed it?
That's up to Sherry,
Okay.
if she's still in offices for selection at that
Yeah.
point.
Okay.
That will be up to her as to how to handle it. And the HR director, I'm sure, will give her some good advice. But, I I appreciate the concern, but I would say it's unfounded, and I wouldn't worry too much about it. I don't think you'll have anything that's a huge megillah different than what you've heard about or seen. You may not like some of the provisions that have been proposed, but, it's all been stuff that's been out there for over a year. And, we'll see how it goes. So, and again, it may not get, I don't know which one of these may or may not go forward. I mean, it's still kind of, I'm just letting you know there may be 1 or 2. But whether or not, they get that far, I don't know yet. So if I had known, it would have been signed off already to the RTM this month.
Yeah.
So, but we did our part kind of over the last month and presented them with and said, hey, this is as far as we're going. And if you feel comfortable and you really want to consider these terms, go ahead.
Okay.
So,
I just think we're so close that the reason I was bringing it up is because we're so close to the end that I just didn't think something needed to be done. It could wait till the Friday or the Monday or whenever to go forward. And,
Well,
Sherry
sure.
at that point could work with the negotiating team to fill her in on where this is all gone.
I'm just trying to say it's kind of a formality at that point, because once the team has finalized a proposal and the collective bargaining session is finished and the parties have shaken hands, which happened already in both cases, it's up to the unit then to take it the next step. And I have an obligation to follow through on that if the unit says, hey, they wish to proceed. If they ratify, we've already said we would sign that document. If first selectman that reneged on that would be immediately brought before the state in an unfair labor practice, and my guess would be in the unfair labor practice, the union would probably prevail. So we're talking, the collective bargaining mirror laws of the state, and there's a process. It's not just, you can't just change the process in the middle. It's not that easy. So.
Is that the case, Dick? We're bound by these handshake agreements that we've signed before the
I
town signs off
think
on?
we're going to, if the town has been empowered to, when it's made an offer which is accepted, to not go through on that would be a bad faith negotiation.
I mean, let me put it this way, there's still a case pending with Thea for bad faith negotiation because the RTM turned down their contract. We had, for the record, a mediator come in and tell the town that that case is gray and the town should keep negotiating that contract because if it goes before the panel for that unfair labor practice, the RTM vote may be at issue.
So why do we have the RTM vote on it?
It's a very limited, the RTM role under the collective bargaining and mirror is very limited. The RTM can only reject the financial terms of a contract. They don't negotiate. And if they turn it down, the parties have an obligation and then a process. But if the unit says the reason it was turned down was not appropriate to their collective bargaining process, they can bring an unfair labor practice. That's what they did. They believed they were going to win it. We believed they were going to lose it. We were defending the RTM, just for the record, in that hearing, but the mediator gave mixed signals. So, and now thankfully we negotiated revisions to that contract that are before the RTM next Monday night. But, just telling you what happened, the Mirror Act is very tricky. I mean, it really is. I mean, if we hadn't, if I was only starting a negotiation, I wouldn't just in 5 days say, oh, let's just take there's 2 units we haven't started with, and I'm not going to just start saying, okay, let's finish something in 4 days and just get it done, But I can't just stop a whole process because it's my last week. I don't think morally that would be fair.
Well, I don't want to rush it through just because there's 8 days left either.
Right, no, I agree.
I mean, I don't want to try to
But what
get
I'm
it-
trying to say is that's not the case in these 2
Okay.
cases. It's really been a process of a number of months, and, one case probably a dozen meetings, and over the last 6 months, and in the other probably 7 or 8. So, I mean, nothing started in the last 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Maybe that's the way I should phrase it. No new unit, we haven't started negotiations in any different way since I made my announcement 3 weeks ago in terms of starting a new negotiation or we just said to the unit, hey, if you want to finish this, you have a certain time frame with me. Afterwards, you have to finish with someone else. But it's interesting. I mean, so. One of them is a very small unit, by the way. One of them is a mid-sized unit, and one is small. But, so. Okay. All right, well, thank you for the question. Now I'm going to think about what can I do? God, I have to start thinking of a list of things I can do now that I said I still have the authority for 5 days. Anyway, hopefully it'll be a smooth, quiet week. No storms, no crises, and hopefully Miss Stenick, when she gets the gavel, will find it a joy, because I really have, most of the time I've found it a pleasure and a joy. And I hope you like it, even if it's a few weeks, a few months, however it works out. I hope you really find it really satisfying, because there's a lot of good stuff to it. And with that said, I really do want to thank, I think the kind of questions you're asking are very, it's important for everybody to have the checks and balances. I do this with the scouts when they come in. We have a government of checks and balances, and I think, you have a right to ask tough questions like that, and I try to respond. But I think that's the beauty of our form of government, that we can have these discussions and really ask anything we want, both of each other and the other boards, the Board of Finance and the RTM. And sometimes the first selectman may get wild because of a discussion, but it's the public process, and it's a healthy process, and I think it's served the town well over the decades and over the generations. And hopefully this form of government will continue for many years to come. And hopefully at least the 2 of you will be involved. I hope. I want to pledge today that you're both going to be involved for a long time to come. And hopefully as a citizen I will be involved as well.
Hopefully Sherry's going to be sitting next to me for a while.
It's still November.
Anyway, with that said, it's been a pleasure being at these selectmen meetings and being part of it for this many years. And I just congratulate you guys and the boards that I've served with, and really just want to say one last formal public thank you to the citizens of Fairfield. Whether we like we all say, whatever party, whatever persuasion, whether we agree on an issue or disagree on an issue, the hope was that we'd talk it out, have a good debate and dialogue, and hope the government will perform in the right way most of the time, and the citizens will be well served most of the time. And that's what we all try to do, in our own ways. And I wish everybody well. I am, and just for the record as well, because I know a number of people around town have asked me, yes, we are still in Fairfield. I am not going anywhere except commuting a little longer than my current commute. And so I will certainly be around town, smiling and waving, and hopefully will be involved as a civic-minded member of the community for a long time to come. So with that said, I guess...
Well, I'd like to also thank you, Ken, just one last time, and on behalf of the citizens of Fairfield, and for your hard work on this very board that you've sat for 16 years, most of the time as first selectman, but a couple times as selectman. I mean, that's a long tenure. You should be proud of that. And that you've done a great job. You've done a great job for the town of Fairfield, and spent a lot of time. With that, I'd also personally like to thank you for welcoming me onto this board when Ralph unfortunately passed away. It was with heavy heart that I took his seat, but you and Sherry both have welcomed me, and it's been a great board, actually, one of my favorite boards so far to work on.
That's
it's been
what
a
we
very
like to hear.
cooperative board, and I think we've got we agree on almost most things, and we try to do what's best for Fairfield. And it's been great working with you on this board.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And let's see. All right, I'm going to keep it short. I'm just going to say, well, first of all, I never thought I would be selectman because I never really sought that, and I never sought first selectman, certainly, and it was certainly a surprise to me when when that was coming up. But it's, every day has been a challenge along the way, and in a good way, sometimes not so good, but mostly in good ways, and you grow with everything you do, so I should be about 6 feet tall by now. But I appreciate all you've done, and I've thought a lot about Denise this last month and a half, because I'm sure she would love to do this.
I actually was thinking of closing with a moment of silence for our former colleagues. We acknowledged, I was acknowledging Denise and Ralph before at the reception, and it's really hard. It's just like we've never had a board of selectmen where we've had, in a short period of time, this much change and much of it sadness. And as much as we've performed our jobs and done our best, there were some very heavy moments of heavy hearts. During these last few years, to lose two such awesome people on this board, and this community hasn't ever had that happen in such a short period of time. So maybe it would be fitting to just, in their memory, do a little moment of silence in their honor. Thank you. And I hope that Denise and Ralph are smiling down here and saying, Ken, it's 40 miles, what are you thinking? I know their memories are here with us. And I would say, all right, I'm going to just close with a thought and jest before I ask for a motion to adjourn. But to all those thinking about it, besides Sherry, to David and to Rob and to Mike and to Kevin and to anybody out there, it's a great position, and yes, there's some heartache, and yes, there's some tough moments, but it's an amazing thing to help lead a community and to do great things for the town of Fairfield and the citizens of Fairfield. And with that said, would one of my colleagues like to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Moved by Sherry.
Second.
Seconded by Jim. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Carries unanimously. Thank you.
Congratulations again. Best of luck.
This actually because I've never really talked about it, so maybe look at this. Because I don't know if it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Sure. But,
Yeah.
is it?
Yeah.